Yeah, it was interesting watching them sort of ascend to the heights they reached in 2023, understanding what went right for them, and then slowly learning lessons about what can go wrong for an organization from there. Pretty eye opening for me in my career about some of the things you need to be paying attention to. They can only be part of the story, but when they're not there, maybe it's a red flag. So, for example, we were just out in training camp in San Diego where the vibe is great. And you might say, oh, the vibe's great for a lot of teams this time of year. Sometimes it isn't. And it wasn't last year. And one of the things we heard was that people really had been working out together. That, as we asked, how did this guy look? How does this guy look? How has their summer been? They didn't know. And this year it seems a bit different, right? It's a group that's back together. And to the point of your question, I think that all happened in this period where Michael Malone is fired, Calvin Malone Booth is fired shortly before the postseason. And there's a group of now veterans in there, a championship core that sort of looked at each other and had to decide, do we want to keep doing this?
I want to kind of go back to last season with the Nuggets. I thought it was so interesting in terms of their journey. They went 57-25, gaining the second seed. They fall to the eventual champions, the Thunder. We all know the drama what took place with the front office, with them getting rid of Mike Malone. And then the rise of David Adelman just amazing. So in your mind, what did you take from just what happened last season now, just, coming up upon this upcoming season? Has your opinions changed in terms of how that kind of turbulent time went down? How do you kind of perceive that in terms? Because it's kind of one of the most interesting, I guess, periods in NBA history, if you think about it, just in terms of just the twists and turns that went down with the Nuggets.
Yeah, it was interesting watching them sort of ascend to the heights they reached in 2023, understanding what went right for them, and then slowly learning lessons about what can go wrong for an organization from there. Pretty eye opening for me in my career about some of the things you need to be paying attention to. They can only be part of the story, but when they're not there, maybe it's a red flag. So, for example, we were just out in training camp in San Diego where the vibe is great. And you might say, oh, the vibe's great for a lot of teams this time of year. Sometimes it isn't. And it wasn't last year. And one of the things we heard was that people really had been working out together. That, as we asked, how did this guy look? How does this guy look? How has their summer been? They didn't know. And this year it seems a bit different, right? It's a group that's back together. And to the point of your question, I think that all happened in this period where Michael Malone is fired, Calvin Booth is fired shortly before the postseason. And there's a group of now veterans in there, a championship core that sort of looked at each other and had to decide, do we want to keep doing this? Frictions had arose, egos were sort of being placed ahead of the team for the first time. And it was really kind of a breaking point for at least that group. Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray, Jokic, you can throw Christian Brown in there as well. Ultimately, what they decided was they still wanted to be a team. They came short. They came up short against OKC. They're not gonna victory lap going 7 games against a team if they lost. But in that series, they kind of rediscovered this desire to keep doing it together. And so far, that's kind of bled into camp here, where I think it's a really reinvigorated group, kind of excited to get another crack at it.
Yeah, it seemed that way during training camp, and just listening to the media day, I've never heard the word vibe used so much
Yeah, no kidding.
in one settings. And I thought that was really interesting. So to your point of kind of re-synchronizing the chemistry of this team, what does David Adelman bring to that? Because just listening to him, I just feel like even though he said a lot of just typical coach speak, I feel that the way he said it, and maybe I'm off base here, but it was almost like a millennial approach in terms of how he was saying it, in terms of like just trying to connect with the team. I just thought that was very interesting in terms of
Yeah,
he was very honest too, in terms of there was a question asked about how he's going to communicate with the team. I think he said, I don't know. I think it just depends on the situation. I thought that was very honest. So I'm just wondering, how do you grasp in terms of kind of the tough situations that are going to go down at any NBA team, and especially the expectations that this core has? What do you think he's going to bring in terms of kind of level setting this team and resetting in terms of if there's any turbulent times in terms of focusing on the end goal, which is a championship for this team?
I mean, you're asking the right questions. These are the things that are sort of being talked about here in Denver. And David Adelman got that job in large part because of what we just talked about, the restoration of the vibe, and he's hoping to maintain it. I mean, he's an X's and O's coach, but when he took the helm, ownership saw how the players decided to come back together with him there. And I think that's ultimately what sold Josh Kroenke and Stan Kroenke on bringing him back full time. His approach to that, though, is interesting. He tries to leave a lot of room for the players to do it on their own. He wants to stick to the clipboard, and he thinks that Jokic, Murray, Gordon, a championship core that are no longer young, but are really now, this is a vet group together. They kind of have to be in charge of maintaining the vibe inside the locker room on a day-to-day basis. He used the term, you can't go into your shell. You got to be out there and demand the right vibe every day. And I thought that was really interesting. And maybe this is the story for Jamal Murray and Jokic heading into this season. They have this chemistry with each other. Can they extend that into some sort of leadership and captainship of the group so that David Adelman can just kind of focus in tactically? So far, what we're hearing is that Jamal Murray has been kind of dialed in that regard. He was instrumental in these player organized workouts that happened well before camp. He's worked hard to make sure the younger guys and the two-way guys feel involved. And frankly, we haven't always heard this stuff about Jamal Murray or Jokic in terms of the active leadership. So potentially some growth there, and hope that it would go a long way for the locker room.
I'm wondering, I think team chemistry gets brought up this in a stereotypical fashion, but I think it's very critical, especially when you saw OKC. You can just tell how all those guys had just a vision, and they've been through really hard times to reach the ultimate goal. And I feel like with the Nuggets, that's fairly within grasp, especially, getting back Bruce Brown, some of the other additions that they've had. And I want to get your opinions on just the offseason. Jonas Valanciunas is, with them, Hardaway Jr., Cameron Johnson, Spencer Jones. What's kind of your opinions of like the Nuggets offseason in terms of their acquisitions and re-signings playing into kind of reestablishing the vibe of Denver?
A lot of people looked around at the finals last year, OKC and Indiana, and saw depth as the common denominator. Jokic, after the Game 7 loss, basically said just as much. Those teams are deep. We're not deep enough. And ownership told us heading into the season as they searched for their new front office. And then that front office, John Wallace and Ben Tenzer, told us, we heard him loud and clear. Depth was the priority heading into the offseason. And I think depth was, at least on paper, what they were able to accomplish, right? Bringing Bruce Brown back, who has had a turbulent go since leaving Denver. Frankly, most of his NBA career, it's been a little touchy. He's not exactly a point guard. What is his role? But he emerged as a utility player in 2023 for Denver and an important piece of the locker room, and they're hopeful to recapture some of that. Tim Hardaway should bring some of the shooting and pop off the bench that they felt like they had to go really young to get in years past. Julian Strawther is a good example. Might well be a very good offensive player in this league. For now, he's still developing, and it's very costly defensively. So they feel like they were able to bring in some vets that are more ready to play those roles in a tight situation right now. And then Jonas Valanciunas, who's maybe the most important piece of this. The Nuggets just have not been able to find a competent backup five or maintain one over the years. Mason Plumlee helped a lot in the beginning. Boogie Cousins, I thought, brought some utility, but the off-the-court stuff, he left Denver the same reason he left the league, really. So they're struggling to find a guy that they can throw out there and just survive, man. Not even thrive, just survive while Jokic is sitting. And they're hopeful that they've cobbled together a real bench unit that can change the tide there.
So I know this might be an unfair question, but you're out there in San Diego, we're talking off air, and they played one preseason game. I mean, there's not that much to go off, but was there anything that would give you hope in terms of maybe they would have that depth coming off the bench, or you need to see a lot more to kind of make that assertion yet?
Bit of both, right? Bit of both. Preseason, I think, read into it at your own risk, I think, but you're hopeful to see some of the chemistry, that starting unit flash. I didn't mention Cam Johnson, which was part of your question there. They really think he's a plug and play guy in that system. Maybe not as dynamic a shooting talent as a healthy Porter would have been. Of course, Porter hasn't been healthy for quite some time, and he was on a really expensive contract. So they're bringing in Cam on a cheaper deal who they think can kind of fill in the cracks more. It's less about go score 20 for us and more about kind of understanding read and react high IQ basketball, which is obviously a staple of any Jokic-led offense. So they really think that they can have some ball is popping possessions, 5 guys out there that know exactly what to do and where to be. We saw some of that in the first game. Unfortunately, we did not see any defense, so it was a bit hard to take the effort they put forth seriously. They did tell us all camp long that they were going to play through Jonas Valanciunas, and we saw that while Jokic rested in game 1. I think he had Joan Behringer on him, the rookie in Minnesota, and it was I almost felt bad for the kid. You know, Jonas had him sealed. He's a big, tall, strong guy, and it was cool for Denver to be able to take advantage of a size mismatch with the second unit. That's something we really haven't seen much of over the years.
So I want to jump into the division. And where do you see the Nuggets holding up? I interviewed another reporter that covers OKC, and they pointed to Nuggets being the biggest competition in terms of, Denver and OKC battling for that spot. And we've seen the Timberwolves be really inconsistent over the years in terms of being a threat to go all the way to being disappointing. So where do you factor Denver? Are they like the favorites to win this division, even the Western Conference? Or do you see, even within this division, some surprises that might be, hey, wait a minute, there might be some roadblocks here?
It's funny how maybe the distinction between the division and the Western Conference here doesn't matter. Like, I think a lot of people might argue it's those 3 teams anyway. Houston was in the mix, of course.
Yeah.
They're going to navigate that Fred VanVleet injury. But so let's just kill both, 2 birds with 1 stone here. And I think it's about OKC in Denver. I think Minnesota's a wild card. I think Houston was a wild card. I don't want to write them off. That's obviously a tough injury to recover from. It's OKC's to lose. I think it should be, with all the depth that they have, all the buy-in they had last year. It doesn't seem like this operation has really changed fundamentally in any way. The only real 2 questions are health and then that continued buy-in. For Denver, the year following their title, the roster wasn't that different. They won 57 games. It looked great. But guys just weren't buying into sort of every little sacrifice they had to make to be part of the larger goal in mind as a team. And they're hopeful that they can kind of get back to that. OKC has it right now. So until further notice, I think they should be the favorites. It's just hard to repeat, right? I think people thought Denver might repeat. They didn't. People thought Boston might repeat. They didn't. OKC might have the depth to do this. We'll see. I think it starts with them. Then I look at Denver, and then I look at Minnesota, who's really the ultimate wild card team out west. Lately, it doesn't really seem to matter what their seed is. They're still a threat to make the conference finals. Matchups, I think, will matter as well. They seem to matter more in this era of parity than ever before.
Totally agree. I want to talk about Jokic, and going back to media day, I thought he had a very jovial mood. I think he gets a bad rap, and I think even with a lot of international players for being kind of dull and boring, when in fact they have a lot of personality. And I even put that with Jonas Valanciunas as well, and even with Giannis Antetokounmpo too. I don't know. I just feel with Jokic, since, I was originally from Albuquerque, moved here, it's just, and I think my other co-host, Matt, we bring this up all the time. I think we've talked to you in the past, that how Jokic is probably one of the most underrated, disrespected professional athletes in the history of sports. It is just baffling to me how lack of media coverage this guy gets for his talent, his accomplishments, and his skill level. I just truly do not understand it. So I guess my question to you is that it's kind of similar to what I've asked you in years past. This year, if he in fact does win the MVP, do you think he finally kind of breaks through into that national consciousness of just the common sports fan appreciating his greatness? Because I just feel like when you talk about the league, it's kind of like, Tatum, SGA, LeBron, Steph, and like Jokic is kind of in this like weird category that people don't talk about unless you just follow the NBA. And I just think it sucks because I don't think his greatness is even going to be appreciated until he retires, which is just truly unfortunate. I guess my point is I just wish the guy gets his flowers now. Why he's in his prime,
right?
And instead of just waiting until the dude retires. So it's just very frustrating.
I'm with you. I think the way you frame that is just right. I think at this point, if you're an NBA fan, Jokic has ascended to that space where, I even think he got a lot of benefit of the doubt from the general public for what's now 2 straight second round exits. I can look at it and give you all the context and nuance for why I think, he needed more help around him. People seem to be generally forgiving. I think he's still considered the best player in the world headed into another season. But you make an interesting point. It just hasn't, and I'm not sure it ever will, transcend the American kind of cultural zeitgeist. It's just not. You just don't hear people talking about Jokic. And part of it is by design, I think. I mean, he's not the most outgoing I think marketable athlete we've ever seen. He does some ads now. He definitely does some ads in other countries and other languages. He's got the 361 deal, which is, different than Nike or Adidas or so he just kind of has this different path. And the other thing is there was never really a hype machine for Jokic. He was this late blossoming second round pick that people had never heard of, right? Luka even is a guy who you heard about him almost to the extent you had heard about LeBron, right? This once in a lifetime prospect, and felt like we knew him before he got here. Jokic it came out of nowhere. So I think as long as he kind of likes operating outside of the spotlight, that's probably the way it's going to be. You're going to need to talk to some hardcore basketball fans, I think, to see people kind of their eyes get wide and they're agreeing with everything you have to say.
Jokic within Denver, I'm a transplant, so I'm just curious, him, having to, live in the city during the season compared to if he were to, to leave and go to just a different environment. I guess what makes him tied to Denver, can you kind of speak on that in terms of specifically that relationship
Sure.
between him and the city? By any chance, can you kind of go into any personal anecdotes or kind of how he feels in terms of like just walking in public? Is it like more anonymity being in Denver compared to
Yeah,
maybe playing in
for
the
sure.
higher market? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely the case. I mean, I can only speak for him to
Sure, of course.
some extent, but yeah, it's all relative. And compared to LA or New York or even Chicago, I think it's something much closer to the speed he's used to. Belgrade's a big, bustling, wonderful city. Serbia is a slower pace and a quieter place, and I think Denver kind of affords him I wouldn't say anonymity. I think people see him at this point.
Sure, of course.
Big, tall guy. They know exactly who
Yeah.
he is. But I think he's afforded some respect, some privacy. I think he feels more comfortable with it, if I could make that assumption, than he would with LA or New York. And I think even long before this extension that's coming up next season kind of came into the conversation, we always felt like in Denver, I don't think this guy wants to move. Like, he's comfortable, his family's comfortable, and I don't think he takes that for granted. So far so good in that regard. I think it's a really good fit for him in Denver.
Yeah, no, totally agree. He seems very, very comfortable. Speaking to that, and this is a question, and again, just is kind of more for my curiosity since living here. With the Nuggets' success, I'm just wondering in terms of just the Colorado sports scene. The Rockies have struggled. We all know about, their struggles and what they're going through. The Broncos are up and down. There's the Rapids. I mean, there's incoming teams with the Denver Summit on their way. Just in terms of how the Nuggets and their connection to the community, have you seen that evolved over time in terms of maybe rising in terms of being? Because I get the sense that this is still a Broncos city.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm incorrect, but I just get the sense
No, you're
they're the number one team here still. Just
I
yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No.
I'm picking up exactly what you're putting down. I would still say largely yes. I think particularly if you saw the Broncos were anywhere near as competitive as the Nuggets have been, it would be Broncos 1, 2, and 3, and it wouldn't be close.
Yeah.
It's changed so much since I got here. Gosh, like 7, 8 years ago now. But there was barely a cultural footprint left by the Nuggets in this town before Jokic. Since then, every year it's grown. Obviously, there was the TV debacle. A lot of people couldn't watch the Nuggets for a while, or at least it was harder than they liked. But with the title being the culmination, it's been rising, it's been growing, it's been more of a Nuggets town each day. And I see more jerseys and more Nuggets pride, and I see it being kind of more intertwined with being a Denverite than ever before. So you really hope, they're back in a position, I think, to truly contend, not hopefully contend, but I think just have what they need. And I think it'd be great for the city if they're able to sort of take advantage of this all eyes are on them dynamic.
I agree. And I've seen that evolution too, in terms of, appreciating what the Nuggets have done. And of course, I've left off the Avalanche too. But I think
sure.
they're very huge here as well.
Sure.
I want to focus on the rest of the NBA. I've kind of been asking the other journalists in terms of previewing their teams and kind of the rest of the landscape of the league. Huge changes in terms of how the games are going to be broadcasted. Kind of what's your vibe in terms of this season in particular? Are you kind of watching in terms of kind of this new paradigm shift in terms of how the games nationally are going to be presented? Are you worrying about that, or are you kind of focused on kind of the local angle with the Nuggets at this point?
Well, I'm worried about these Tuesday night games that might start in, I think, 9 p.m. Mountain Time. So there's that, which I think is that NBC? Do I have that right?
I think so.
One of them is just they're going to go real late. All the same, I think it's good actually. I think I'm excited for the introduction of more broadcast teams, more variety there, kind of in without naming names. I think people just kind of got sick of the ESPN broadcast as it was, and I think having so many options, obviously people will miss TNT as it was. We'll see how it continues to be. I'm really excited for the league this year. I think if OKC doesn't win, we're looking at this really fascinating dynamic of we have to rethink kind of how we look at the ring culture part of it. It's so hard to get one right now, and going back to back looks so difficult. And there were times where, dynasties were built in this league, or there was the big three era, or there was that. Now you just you got to be 10 deep. You got to stay healthy. You got to get the matchups right. I think OKC has what they need to repeat. If they don't, I think we're looking at some really interesting it's harder than ever to predict who's going to win year to year. And I think that should be exciting. I think for whatever's lost from watching the Cavs and the Warriors in the finals and the prestige and the hype that there was around that, there's something so cool that for the first time in a long time, you're watching the NBA and you're not entirely sure how it's going to go. To me, that's a welcome change.
Totally agree. I think it speaks to the depth of the league as well in terms of how many talented players there are. And I just feel, I pointed this out in the past that, on League Pass, I think, in some years, there'd be some teams that'd be like, why are you watching this game? There's really nothing to see. But I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but with all the teams, there's at least one player that's like really captivating to watch.
Totally.
So I just feel like, it's really wide open in terms of injuries, in terms of just breaks that teams could have. And I think that makes it really exciting. And I don't know, I think it sucks that people put up such a premium on dynasties. I think it just gets lost in terms of how much depth that there is. And I don't know, I hope that NBA fans adopt an NFL culture a little bit in terms of a lot of teams within the National Football League. They're really built in, and later just breaks that happen that might affect the team or might push a team to go to the Super Bowl, even though the Chiefs have been pretty dominant in recent years.
Sure.
There's been multiple teams that you've seen, from the NFC that you would never thought you would see. So I just hope that kind of appreciation for parity happens within the NBA.
I think so. And, people immediately point to the ratings, OKC and D, they're a little lower. Whatever. I think if this is the cost of just kind of reconditioning the audience to, it's not just about the Lakers and I don't know, I was going to say the Knicks, although it's so rarely about the Knicks in this league anymore, but whomever the national media kind of decides is the most profitable kind of market to key in on, I really appreciate this potential reconditioning of the NBA audience. Like, no one thought the Pacers were going to win a title. Like, just no one. I think even Pacers analysts who were really excited were not that bullish, and they might have done it if Tyrese stayed healthy. And I think they had their run the year before, and I think almost everyone kind of just patted them on the head, cute little run from Indy. Like, in hindsight, from the Nuggets perspective, we used to look at all these games throughout the year as like, okay, they're playing the Wolves, this is important. They're playing the Thunder, this is important. Those Pacer games were awfully important, and we kind of like didn't look at them that way at the time, So I think just kind of being open to this league not being something we can fully understand and predict the way it was, this is a good change.
It's a new paradigm shift, and I hope that also the league really I guess makes a big deal of their signature events. I think that includes the finals, because I think they changed in terms of the player introductions. And just kind of, I know a little people were complaining about like the decals on the floor, and I might not see a big deal, but the Super Bowl's a maximum deal. They hype everything up, and you feel like it's a Titanic game. Even if the two teams you're not even into it, you still feel it's a huge deal. And I feel like with the finals, that kind of played in maybe the lower ratings. I mean, you have two teams that are relatively new to the national spotlight. You don't even make it a big deal that they're in the NBA finals.
Yeah.
This is the culmination of the season. This is your signature event, and yet you don't treat it that way. And I think that similar things are happening in the W as well. So So I think that's played into maybe also Jokic's not appreciation not being valued too. It's just that I don't think the league really values itself sometimes and propping up its stars. And I think it kind of hurts the value of the league sometimes.
I agree. I mean, I think I could be wrong on this, but I think one in either last year or the season prior, it was the first time ever that Giannis and Jokic was on national TV, you know? Doesn't that just seem like an easy one to get right? Like these have been the two easiest candidates for the best player in the world, however you look at it, for half a decade, I think. So yeah, I'm with you. I think kind of drama and prestige that was drummed up for Jordan or LeBron, it's hard to see that kind of, it certainly hasn't been the case for Jokic. You know, I think even SGA, who just had this remarkable run, he's more marketable, I think, in a traditional way to an American audience than Jokic is. But even still, it doesn't feel like the myth making and the storytelling is as poignant and as powerful. So you might be onto something there. You know, it's always one of those things that I think it's easier to say. I always say it's easy to think you're the smartest guy in all the rooms you're not in. You know, I think they should market better. All right, what does that mean? But I think you raise a good point, and a good example is, I don't know, Giannis and Jokic should be a prize product for you guys, and any time that they had met over the years should have been a huge deal, and it wasn't. So your finals example is good. There's another one
Yeah, and I just think, being a millennial, growing up in the 90s, I just think, I interviewed John Tesh recently with, he created Round Ball Rock. And they just his musical score just before the game started with either as Bob Costas or there's Marv Albert, like creating the scene drama. It just seems cinematic. Like, I think that was part. I mean, Michael Jordan, he's great regardless. But I just think this adding a lot of gravitas to it. I think people forget this is entertainment as well. I mean, this is also competition, but it's entertainment. People are paying tickets to see what's going on. And I just think that's lost in terms of the presentation happening now, just in terms of building up, like, these are larger than life, athletes that are taking place here. These, when you go to a media day, I mean, these athletes are, some of the most athletically gifted, tallest human beings on the planet, and I just don't think that's being reflected into the coverage. So that's, to me, that's when I think should be improved in terms of marketing the league better, in terms of the television coverage of really, hyping these guys up. And I feel like that's relatively easy to do, especially in this age of social media. So I don't know. I just hope that there's some improvements made in that.
That's why I'm excited about kind of the shakeup to the media landscape of just maybe a variety and maybe some competition and just kind of pushing it forward a bit.
Yeah, agreed. One last question for you. Is there anything else that you're looking at this season that's got you excited, or that there should be some storylines that's fallen under the radar that fans should be paying attention to?
Man, that's a great one. League-wide, I think we'd kind of hit on it largely, just that I think the parity thing is really actually exciting. And although I think OKC should be the favorites right now, if they don't win, I think the conversations will be really interesting. I like the move Orlando made. I think in the era, in adding Desmond Bane, certainly overpaying in a vacuum, but I think this is kind of the time where you should do that, especially in the East where it feels so wide open. Like, matchups can change everything. One injury can change everything. More than ever before, if you think you're close, you should think about it like we actually have a chance. And I think operate that way. So it didn't work for the Knicks, overpaying for Bridges, but I like that they did it. It might not work for the Magic, maybe overpaying for Bane, but I like that they did it. You look at the East, and is it the Cavs? Is it the Knicks after that? Who would you mention? And I think the Magic have put themselves kind of in that conversation.
Totally agree. I think it's very wide open. And I guess this era of parity in the NBA, I think it makes it exciting for like a younger team to rise that you didn't count on. I think similar to what happened with the Pacers. So I think that makes it more exciting to watch. Brendan, thank you very much for joining us. Truly appreciate it. Can you let our audience know where you're located on social media, where they can catch your work, and any other projects that you're working on as well?
For sure. My pleasure, man. Always a fun time hopping on. You can follow me on Twitter at Brendan Vogt. It's VOGT. I'm working at DNVR Nuggets these days. That's thednvr.com. We're going to drop our season preview soon. We're working hard. I had some good content coming from training camp, an exclusive from Christian Brown coming soon. But just check us out if you're interested in what the Nuggets are doing. I like to think at DNVR Nuggets, we've really got you covered. So check us out this season.
Awesome. Brendan, thank you very much. Sure appreciate it.